wagglers, you can still cast it out. To be honest, there's a lot of rods on the market and a lot of them are either too stiff and they're brilliant for big wagglers, or they're too floppy and they're okay for smaller wagglers but they won't cast bigger floats. So that's rod choice, but again, you know, I know budget depends on it, but I know Guru are bringing out some N-gauge rods which will be a lot cheaper, so maybe have a look at those. Reel wise, again, that's me feed pellets as such. Now if you went somewhere where the lake was maybe slightly smaller and the fish was slightly smaller, then 6mm coppins can be a really good feed bait as well. Then hook bait wise, what I've got is I've got a few coppins, but they're light in colour. These can be very good on the hook. They're just slightly lighter than my feed pellets, and I always take a few light ones just for the hook. Be really good on a bomb and good on a waggler as well. I always pick the little fat one because I just think it's more in proportion. The one thing with that one is the 10-gram one is if it's very windy, that can be a good float, and maybe if you're sinking your line, because it's just going to keep all your tackle, your terminal tackle, slightly deeper in the water. But normally if I'm going to use a 10-grammer, I normally use the big fat one rather than the thin one. But it's always worth having a few if you want to sink your line. Then moving on that same topic of sinking your line and maybe hanging the bait, then it's always, the rod is heavier this way. So when it actually comes to trying to hold the rod, cast, there's more weight above your hand than below your hand. Now the balancing point of my rod is basically roughly where my finger is. So there, if that makes sense. That's where the balancing point is. If I put my finger here, does that make sense? Where the balancing point of the rod is. So getting your hand above the reel, or even one finger below if you've got big hands, but I've only got little hands, so I can put my whole hand above it. That way I'm on the balancing point of the rod all of the time. That is really important. Then what I'm going to do, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through my way of sort of fishing a waggler and getting your technique right. So starting off with, get the drop, sort of, you know, roughly half of the rod to the butt, not half of the rod to my hand, roughly half of the rod to my butt. Get it right, look low and hard, stop it, and then I'd be putting it on my rod rest, feeding, twitching, feeding, and then winding in. But just for the purpose of this, I'm going to talk you through my technique. Now what's really important is, if you're getting your bites, maybe not now, if you're getting most of your bites when you feed and wind into your bait, or as it pops up there, now it's going, then spend more time doing that. If you're not getting millions of bites, you know, when like Whiteacres for argument's sake and Loco Lake, on the high bank of Match Lake and Loco, they're very deep and they're big, old, wise, clever fish, and you can catch them. They can be in your peg, but because of how big they are, you'll catch them sort of 4 foot deep hanging it. You won't catch hardly any fish on the splash. I remember I had a match and I drew sock on, 27 on the high bank. I've caught 180 odd pound on a waggler. I never had one fish pull my rod. I had to strike every single one of them because they're all massive. And that's the thing, depending on what venue you fish, like I know from experience of coming here, the sort of 2 foot hook length,